Title: 6 Days to Victory. The untold story of the Six-Day War. The sun had barely begun to rise over the desert landscape when Captain David Cohen stood beside his Mirage 3 fighter jet, heart pounding in anticipation. The air smelled of gasoline and metal, a stark reminder that war was no longer a distant possibility, but an imminent reality. Israel was surrounded on all fronts. Egyptian forces amassed in the Sinai Peninsula, Syrian artillery pounded settlements in the north, and Jordan was poised to strike from the east. As he tightened his grip on his flight helmet, he knew that in a few hours, history would be made. Thousands of miles away, in Cairo, General Abdul Hakim Amr convened with his top military advisors in a dimly lit war room. Smoke curled from his cigar as he reviewed the latest intelligence reports. The Egyptian military, the most formidable in the Arab world, stood ready. "The Zionists will strike first," Amr declared with conviction. "We must be prepared." President Gamal Abdel Nasser had already made his intentions clear. Israel would be crushed, its people driven into the sea. Egyptian troops had been bolstered with Soviet-backed training, and the recent blockade of the Straits of Tiran was a direct challenge to Israel's existence. In Tel Aviv, Defense Minister Moshe Dayan studied maps and intelligence reports with Prime Minister Levi Eshkol. The room was thick with tension. Every passing hour brought them closer to war. "We cannot afford to wait," Dayan finally said. "If we do not act now, we may never get the chance." A hush fell over the room before the final order was given. Operation Focus, the largest preemptive airstrike in history, was set into motion. June 5, 1967. At precisely 7:10 a.m., Israeli fighter jets, flying at dangerously low altitudes to avoid radar detection, streaked across the Egyptian skies. The roar of their engines was deafening. As they reached their targets, Egyptian airbases in Sinai and beyond, the first bombs fell, sending plumes of smoke and fire into the air. Egyptian pilots ran frantically toward their planes, but it was too late. Within a matter of hours, nearly the entire Egyptian Air Force was reduced to smoldering ruins. Radio transmissions crackled with reports of success. "The enemy's wings have been clipped," one pilot announced. Israel had gained air superiority before Egypt even had a chance to retaliate. As the skies burned, Israeli ground forces launched a coordinated assault on the Sinai Peninsula. Tanks rumbled forward, kicking up clouds of dust, while infantry units advanced with precision. Egyptian troops, disoriented and leaderless after the devastating airstrike, were thrown into chaos. Some attempted to fight back, but most were forced into a disorganized retreat. Along the battlefield, young Israeli soldiers, many barely out of their teens, fought fiercely, knowing that failure was not an option. In the brutal heat of the desert, bodies fell, blood soaked into the sand, and the echoes of war rang out across the land. Meanwhile, in the east, Jordanian forces, believing Egypt had the upper hand, began shelling Israeli positions in Jerusalem. The old city, sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, became a battlefield. Israeli paratroopers were sent in to reclaim it, pushing through the winding streets and ancient alleyways. Snipers lurked in windows, and the sound of gunfire bounced off the stone walls. The battle was fierce, but by June 7th, the Israeli flag flew over the Western Wall for the first time in nearly 2,000 years. Soldiers wept openly, their hands pressed against the ancient stones, knowing they had reclaimed a piece of their history. To the north, Syrian forces continued their relentless artillery barrage on Israeli settlements in the Galilee. The decision was made: Israel would take the fight to the Golan Heights. The terrain was treacherous, with steep hills and heavily fortified Syrian positions. Israeli soldiers, exhausted but determined, climbed the rugged slopes under constant fire. Every inch was a struggle, every step forward met with fierce resistance. Yet, through sheer will and tactical precision, they advanced. By June 10th, the Syrian defenses crumbled, and the Golan Heights fell into Israeli hands. After just 6 days of fighting, the war was over. Israel had achieved a stunning and unexpected victory, seizing control of the Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank, the Golan Heights, and the entirety of Jerusalem. The Arab world was left in shock, unable to comprehend how such a swift and decisive defeat had unfolded. In Washington, the U.S. government scrambled to reassess its Middle Eastern policies. In Moscow, Soviet leaders seethed at the failure of their allies. The global balance of power had shifted in less than a week. In the days that followed, the world watched as Israeli soldiers returned home, some as heroes, others in caskets draped with flags. The streets of Jerusalem filled with celebratory chants, but beneath the surface, a new reality had taken shape. The Six-Day War had not only redrawn the map of the Middle East, but had sown the seeds of conflicts that would persist for generations. As Captain David Cohen stepped out of his jet, exhausted but victorious, he looked toward the horizon. Israel had survived, but at what cost? In the distance, the smoke still lingered, a haunting reminder that war, no matter how brief, always left scars that time could never erase.